Oh, sliding into the podcast.
That's more like a shimmy than a slide.
Main podcast.
That's a Steph Curry shimmy.
Shimmy. Amico. Intellivision Amico. Y'all know what the Amico is. You'll know what the Amico is. There was another kind of preview of the Amico that came from, what is the name of this actual website?
It's Heiss Online.
Heiss Online.
The motherland, Deutschland.
And the translated title of the article is Intellivision Amico tried out the console with the Wollmilchsau controller. Now, what Wollmilchsau is it refers to a mythical beast in German folklore that I believe it means wool, milk, meat. So basically, it's a mythical animal that does everything. So
it has the picture I'm looking at has a pig's head. It has like a rooster's tail. It has cow udders and like duck feet.
So they're calling the controller a mythical can do it all, is basically what they're saying. This article definitely reads less advertorial than some of the previous ones did. I'd say this is probably, if you consider yourself genuinely middle of the road on the Amico or undecided, I think this article is probably a good one for you to read because it addresses some serious concerns without being over the top or incendiary, I guess. And it
gives you the facts. It doesn't sugarcoat. The second paragraph brings up company boss Tommy Tallarico threatened a U.S. meeting with legal action that had reported a leak from the developer portal. It doesn't gloss over the bad behavior,
right,
of the CEO, for example.
Doesn't gloss over bad behavior and definitely says some things. It definitely has its concerns. So there are two things that I really want to point out from this article that, and one of them that I think is something we haven't really mentioned, but is important to bring up. So they talk about the games that are on the Amico, and they talk about how this is supposed to be a system, that is easy to pick up and play, for grandma, grandpa, your older relatives, your parents and such. And they talk about how they played a little bit of skiing, Astro Smash, and Evel Knievel. And they talked about the controller. So the controller has the directional disc. It has the shoulder buttons. It has the buttons underneath, and it has the touch screen. But it can also be oriented left to right,
vertically
right
or
to
horizontal.
left, vertically. Yeah. And they talk about how the games share there's no through line on the controls. Basically,
there's no overall
cohesiveness
of the control schemes.
So basically, in missile command. So basically, he says, you pick up Evel Knievel and you can use the gyro or you can use the disc. And they talk about how the gyro seems very spotty on the controller in the article. They talk about how it seems doesn't seem sensitive enough or too sensitive. Maybe it's jittery.
Okay.
But then they talk about how missile command, you aim with the touchpad and then you fire by using the disc, by pressing left or right on the disc.
For the three different fire missile silos, sure.
Right. And then they talk about how skiing, you just use the control stick.
But not the gyro. Which
would have made sense.
Because skiing, you lean.
So if you're trying to make a console that is, usable by everyone, you want there to be some sort of through line so that when they learn the controls of one game, they can apply it to the next game that they play.
Especially if these are quick gaming experiences.
Especially, if they're quick gaming experiences, they're going to be changing up, what they're playing often. And what they say is that there appears to be too much of an attempt to use gimmicky things on this controller, and there is no, cohesive feel to it. So they actually think it would be harder for people who aren't used to video games because they can orient the controller this way, or they were moving at one point with this, but now they're moving with this. Whereas honestly, and we've always given Tommy shit for this because it's true, there's nothing that confusing about a modern controller.
No.
Once you learn how to play one game with a modern controller, they're designed by people who are smart, and they don't design these things to be hard to use. That's against the design ethos. They design these things, they design the games and the controls so that people can apply what they know from one game to another. It's why it's why once you learn how to play one game on like a Switch, you can pick up, you know what your forward button is, you know what your cancel button is, you know you're moving with this, you know shoulder buttons are usually going to be where you shoot when you're playing a first-person shooter. There are things that pass on, and there's nothing like that happening here.
We've had 40 years of, you can say, of market research into game controllers by the companies themselves, trying and sometimes failing. There's a reason why they did away with the Intellivision disc, because it sucked back in 1979. They did away with like the chunky controllers with the keypads that they try to do on 3 different consoles. They try to do that. And even the chunky joystick that the ColecoVision had, which was okay, but not the best thing. There's a reason why when Nintendo said, we're going to do a D-pad, that every fucking console after that had to do a D-pad. They figured out this is what works for the most amount of people. It's easy to figure out, and we're going to carry this forward. Well, like, it was a natural progression.
And I want to point out that the Switch was, they used the remote and the nunchuck, and it was supposed to be easy for casual people, or the Wii. But they
had a D-pad.
But they abandoned that too. They didn't keep up with it. Why? Because the controller always shows itself to be the best input method for video games.
They still had face buttons available. They had what worked just in case a game needed it. They didn't just say, well, we had this forever, we're going to do this. No, they realized this is what people are used to. We've played games now for 40 years, a lot of us, sometimes more. Why abandon what you know works? You know these things work. You know that a face button is the best way to play a platformer. Not what they say, spongy, which was our fear, spongy buttons on the top.
Shoulder buttons.
We always complain. We always say, these going to be clicky buttons or spongy? A spongy shoulder button is the worst way to play an action game.
Yeah.
It's harder to press it multiple times. You don't get that direct feedback when you're pressing it back and forth. It's the only thing that's bad. You can't even call them spongy, but the Super Nintendo shoulder buttons are the worst thing about that controller, and the rest of the controller is fantastic. Sometimes they can be a little bit off. So it's hard to do shoulder buttons properly, but it's not what you want for a game where you're constantly pressing them. You do not want to use shoulder buttons, at least those old school ones, when you're constantly pressing shit for a platformer. You don't want it to also, like, for example, for like Finnegan Fox, hit the fucking button, the touchpad to jump, for example, is miserable. And I think they pointed that out in this. I think they mentioned that here, or someone did.
What?
There was Finnegan Fox in this one, or someone was talking about the event in Boston, how it's hard to keep jumping in Finnegan Fox. That's why someone in Boston pointed out it's hard to keep jumping when you hit the touch screen to jump. Things like that. That there's a reason why this stuff was never done before. There's a reason why video game companies stayed away or shied away from these, because it was tried before, or they realized we can't do this. We can't do this.
The other thing I wanted to point out real quick was just that basically this article, or this section of it, nevertheless, the Amico controller left an ambivalent impression. Can do pretty much everything, but none of it exceptionally well, which is, I think, what we all have known. The controller is really the fucking albatross around Tommy's neck on this one, on the Amico.
Well, it's also the price being horrible, which they point out in the article at the end. It's going to be that, they point out, the Switch is about the same amount of money.
Yeah.
What are you going to play, at that point?
But I mean, we've heard that internally the controller is not well loved.
No,
I mean they're spending and they're spending so much time after all of those the Turkey Point get together with 15 people or whatever it was.
Turkey Point,
Thanksgiving Point. They're always they dedicate so much time to people being like, the controller's fine, it's good, it's not bad,
it's not broken.
Like the controller is obviously a problem.
Now they like to say that, well, there's no lag in this. Well, there was 10 months ago, but now that it's gone, we fixed it. That means the controller works great. No, it doesn't. It means you have a functional controller. It doesn't mean it's going to work well with your games. But congratulations for not trying to trick people and having upside down controllers anymore in your gameplay videos. They also talk. This is an important thing about the German influence on this console. I didn't know there was this amount. Hans Ippich, who's the head of there's the Intellivision Germany company, which from what I hear, they're the real company behind this in terms of like the financials. Right. They're the one managing this. 17 of the 25 launch games they claim to be 25. 17 are being developed by German studios. 17
That's
of
25 launch games now.
They said there's 25 launch games. I don't think there's going to be 25 launch games, but 17. They brought up skiing. They brought up Space Strikers, which is going to come out on the Switch as well. But we talked about how again, there was a Bavarian Arts and Entertainment grant where several of their games, like skiing and cornhole, and I believe Astro Smash.
I believe all of their pack-in games, with the exception.
I don't think it's all of them, but it's at least 4 of them. They come from German grant money. So without the German influence, you would not have a console. You would not have these games being developed.
Right.
You would have almost no pack-in games. That's an important key, I think, to know the health of this company. Well, I was talking about whether or not they have to pay back that Bavarian grant money and how that grant even works. They call it the all-rounder controller. So the orientation of the display only changes after pressing the home button, so that does not change accidentally while playing. That's not bad. Loudspeaker and microphone, like a vibration motor, can be switched off, are also part of the controller. They talked about the LEDs real quick. Let me find that. That was an interesting part when I read this article about the LEDs. Here we go. An LED around the controller. This is talking about Astro Smash. An LED around the controller control disc flashes in time with the game or shows which piece you are controlling. In Astro Smash, for example, a blue light signals that the fate of the blue spaceship is currently being steered.
That's just bad translation. It just means that it glows blue to represent you're the blue ship.
But you don't know you're the blue ship? You have to look at the controller to realize you're the blue ship?
I'm sure you would know. It's just a gimmicky
thing just to use the LED.
Yes,
I was trying to, I'm like, okay.
No, I think it's just weird translation. It's not saying it does anything special.
The visual aid is really handy, especially since it can get chaotic on the television. I don't understand that. Like, looking at your controller is not going to let you know on screen which one is it. It has to be blue on screen. Otherwise, how do you know what you're controlling? That seems like a really weird stretch to think that the LED is going to help you for something like that.
I think that's exactly what it is. I think it's just them stretching, trying to find something. That's handy.
Carefree console for parents. Okay. Titles have a maximum age rating of 6 years old. I guess that means for the minimum. The max minimum is 6 years old. No YouTube apps or even a web browser. This will ensure that parents can put Amico in their children's room without any worries. All games are specifically developed for the Amico or adapted and strictly curated, which is funny because when you say put the Amico in their children's room, kids nowadays, a lot of them don't even have a TV, or even if they have a children's room, they have their pad, their iPad.
Right.
That's their entertainment medium, or their phone. That's their world. It just shows you how out of touch even an article trying to be positive about it can be like, well, children's room, big TVs and hooked up consoles. Now,
like I said, a lot of this is, and I see this with, I think, some well-meaning people too who have gotten behind the Amico and don't really push it. Sure. But have been like, oh, I'm kind of interested in it. And they say stuff like this without realizing that it sounds nice, but it functionally means nothing in the modern era.
This isn't 2004.
It's not 1994. We're beyond the need for this. Unless you just want to spend money, everything that you could possibly want out of the Amico is available on the Switch.
But here's like a strike against it from the article writer. The project does not always succeed. In the game menus in particular, it was often completely unclear whether it was necessary to press one of the buttons or operate the touchscreen. There are no standardized rules for navigation. So that's a great point. It goes back to the control scheme setup. This is the problem when you have a hodgepodge system where you get grant money, you try to hire people, you do ports of games that pre-exist on Switch or mobile devices. These aren't built from the ground up, some of these games. Or you're just making sure you're trying to go for quantity over quality. And at the same time, you have no one on staff that maybe help or give them rules. You have your 10 commandments for games. How about every game, this is how you should navigate menus?
Well, that's what I was going to say. So, this proves that they say things like, oh, it's a family console and we want it to be for the people who don't know how to game. They can say that, and that sounds nice in theory. But if you don't actually implement design into your console that makes it easy for people, doesn't matter if all of your games are fucking depthless fucking shoebox
shark
shark, if they can't figure out how to get into the game.
That's a great point. That's one thing we never brought up. I brought the fact how I think we did. There was no cohesive look to design. The actual look of the games.
it looks as thrown together as it is.
This is damning from this article. In the case of several titles, it took a few minutes, despite the instructions, for all players to successfully dial into a title. That is bad. That's bad.
Yeah, that's real bad.
If you got to pass around, if you have 4 controllers, pass around these controllers, have mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, little Johnny and Sue figure out how to do this. We're talking all experience levels, all different experiences, playing games in the past or not. Now you have to give them this what they say is not even a very ergonomic controller, awkward controller to hold.
It's awkward to hold.
That's not going to be your quick and easy, let's go. That's not going to be Wii Bowling. Here, grandma, swing it, hold the button, swing it. That's your Wii Bowling, right? That's it.
Right. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to say other than you'll notice that this is not one of the articles that Tommy has been touting around the internet like he does with all the other ones.
Yeah, the Republic investors, I don't think they're getting this one. Let's have an update to Republic. I'm sure they want to know about all the physical products that have sold. Oh no, there has been an update since September 30th on Republic. These people gave you millions of dollars. They're not good enough to get an update, even every other week, let alone every month. They can't even do it every month. It's bad. Oh, there's a positive. Pool and Billiards showed how they could use the controller well. You can first roughly position the cue using the touchscreen before fine-tuning it with the control disc. If you want, you can set the exact point of impact on the ball on the touchscreen. That was from Danish developer studio. There, Pool Legends has already gained experience with the development of touchscreens for smartphones. Okay, so they already had experience with games on touchscreen, so that's how they can do it there. Ipish has recognized this as a problem and promises improvement. 3 of the games pre-installed at the launch that Highs Online has not been able to try out should use the gyroscope and touchscreen more intensely. As an example, Intellivision names, I would say Farkle, in which dice are thrown from the touchscreen onto the monitor, and Cornhole, on the other hand, you should throw bags as precisely as possible using motion controls. Yes, if they get the motion controls working, since they had to rework them. In future developments, Intellivision wants to place more value on the fact that the special abilities of the controllers are used. I think when you have this sort of marketing from controller out versus game first, I think that's again the sort of like you said, the albatross. You should be selling a console again on the games. What games are you
everything
offering?
they've tried to sell this console on has not been on the games, which is what's crazy. They tried to sell it on the console, on the controller. They tried to sell it on the look. They tried to sell it on nostalgia appeal when they're not trying to sell it as a all-in-one family savior.
Here's the thing about the lag here. We did not notice we didn't notice any noticeable delay between input and response. The input felt just as low as in latency as other game consoles. Great, they figured it out. Some games were a bit sluggish, but that was always due to the software implementation. What does it mean? The games were a bit sluggish, but that was due to the software implementation.
It means that the games aren't finely tuned.
So that means like they're not being responsive still, or they're not being frames per second. That seems like that was something Hans told them to say, that it was due to software, not hardware. That's a weird thing. How would they know that if they're just reviewing the game with a software implementation?
Again, I think it's a translation thing. I don't think there's enough in that article that I don't think Hans told them to say something. I think we're just not understanding it properly.
Okay, but it did say sluggish though. That's a very key word. They were a bit sluggish on the games. Okay, here you talk about the ambivalent impression of the controller. This is a great point here. Maybe it would have been smarter if Intellivision had committed itself to a single gimmick, like they said for the Playdate, in which some games are specially designed for the special crank control. Instead, Amico wants to be able to do everything and pays for this flexibility with the problem areas mentioned. There you go. So again, the controller is the death knell to this console, and the price. That's the 1-2 combination here. I mean, and the fact that a lot of these games are, they're mobile quality and some of them are ports of pre-existing. I mean, there's a lot of bad problems here. But that controller, my lord, I don't think people would be nearly as critical of this whole thing if you had more standard. Hell, if the controllers were almost like a direct knockoff of the freaking Wii controllers, I don't think people would complain as much compared to this. Because at least that functioned. And people, you can play different types of games, either using for motion or as a platformer, holding the controller. You can still play a Super Mario game on that. At least you had that going on with this. But yeah, there it goes. Spongy buttons. What I feared. Spongy buttons is the worst when it comes to playing action games. The overloaded Wool Michal controller in particular still looks half-baked and lacks a clear vision. Many of the games shown are also entertaining for a short time at best, or would work at least as well on other systems. Wow, that sounds like something some dumb hater podcasters probably said. The games could work in other systems. Mm-hmm. You could have published these on PS4.
We were called idiots, though.
What's that?
We were called idiots, though, because you need this controller.
You need it. You need it for all these games. You can't do Missile Command in any console. Mm-mm. You can't do Shark in any console that exists. You can't do it. You can't do Evil Knievel. You can do it on a smartphone. And the game's been out for 5-6 years. All right, anything else to add here?
No.